Today, at this wonderful event, we are talking about the future. Now, if you were to take a moment and just imagine that future, what would that world look like to you? Would every adult and child have enough food to eat? Would it be a world that is free from poverty? Would there be equity and equality between women and men from all walks of life? Having and holding on to that bright, bold, beautiful vision of the future is incredibly important. It's profound. It's also only the first step in the journey, isn't it? There's still that little matter of figuring out exactly how are we going to get there. One of the things that's going to be very important for us to have on our radar as we're trying to navigate our way to the future is just how potent assumptions are in shaping exactly how we engage with challenges and in shaping the outcomes of those challenges. And by the assumptions, I mean the nature of the situation or understanding the rules of the game. And I can give a little story to illustrate that from when I was young, and I was lucky enough to have a brother and sister older than I was, and they let me hang out with them and their older gang of friends. And we used to run around and play all sorts of things. And one day, we were playing a game in which one person would hide and everybody would seek. And if you found the person, you would join them. And then if somebody else found you, they would join you, and eventually you're all together. And on this occasion, I started searching, but then I instantly realized there's probably one best hiding place, and it was in the woodshed up high. And it was too high for me because, quite frankly, I was a bit of a shrimp. And so I went to an older girl and I said, I have an idea, you have the height, let's team up. And off we went, and she opened the shed and said, sorry kid, no luck. And she went one way and I went the other. And I kept searching and searching, and about 30 minutes later I realized I was alone. And I figured out what had happened, and I circled back to the woodshed, and I dragged something over, and I climbed up, and I looked in, and there they were. The girl, the gang, to about 24 super creepy spiders. And the important thing about the assumption in this story is the nature of the assumption. And that is that it was a zero-sum game assumption. And zero-sum game refers to a situation in which, in order for one person to win, the other person has to lose. Like a teeter-totter. For one side to go up, the other side has to go down. Now that kind of assumption is very useful in all sorts of situations. From chess and checkers to if you were heading off to the Southeast Asian Games and you wanted to win. The question is, though, how useful is that kind of assumption in the case of getting us to the future that we want? In very specific terms, how useful is that kind of assumption in terms of equity and equality and getting to that future? And I ask that because that's a question, it's an assumption that I encounter quite a lot in my work in research for development. Research for development it's really just a fancy way of saying a lot of people who are very committed to finding pathways to that future. The way I encounter this assumption, you can kind of break it down into two main questions. And the first one is, it's a question of, okay, we have all these pressing challenges in the world, and some of them are quite concrete, like poverty and not enough food. Shouldn't we be prioritizing these concrete ones, doing those first, before we spend our limited time and resources on pursuing equity and equality? That's one of the big questions I encounter. The other one is one that a colleague said the other day, it's one that people think more often than they say it. So I was actually quite pleased when a gentleman actually said at a workshop the other day, he was a little bit sheepish when he said it. He said, okay, I know, in developing countries, women and women farmers, they have far fewer resources. They have less access to and control over technologies, information. They have lower wages. They have to do more unpaid work. They have all the child care. And he listed a long list of things that he understood. And he said, for all these reasons, this means that equity and equality they're going to be a really nice thing for women, aren't they? And then he said, this was the sheepish part, he said, yes, but the men, what about the poor men? So let's look at those two questions, starting with the first one. In the question of equity and equality in relation to food security, the backdrop, of course, is that we still have a lot of people without enough nutrition and food in the world. About 800 million is estimated at present. That's especially true for developing countries, and there's that issue has been compounded because that's where the population growth is fastest, so we need food production to keep pace with that. But there is a challenge. There are men farmers and women farmers, and right now women farmers are able to produce less than men farmers. Why? The why has to do with what the gentleman was referring to. Women farmers have less access to all the things they need to grow the same amount of food. Things like good feed, good seed, good fertilizer, information, training, all of these things. So what looks like a food production problem actually has a lot to do with an inequality problem. Now, what would happen if women actually had the same or equal access as male farmers? What do you think would happen? Lucky for us, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has actually crunched those numbers. And what they came up with was, if women and men farmers had the same access, equal access, food production would go up, and up to the tune of 100 to 150 million more people having access to food. That's the equivalent of 4 Malaysias going from not having enough to having enough. It's quite extraordinary. It's quite a profound shift for just making things equal. This relationship, this amplifying of food outcomes, is something that I've also seen on the ground in work that I've been doing with a wonderful group and some great partners in Bangladesh, for example, where there are significant food challenges, including that the little ones, the kids under 5, about half of them suffer from stunting, so they cannot grow to their full physical or mental potential. This is a huge issue when we're talking about the future, let alone the present. So in this context, we've been working in the area of helping poor farmers get more fish and strengthen their backyard pond systems. And one of our entry points is by working to get women more access to and control over these ponds and over technologies. And we've been working with women and men together to say, okay, are there issues that are about gender that are actually shaping the nutrition outcomes for your families as well? And over the course of doing this, we found something really interesting. Over time, through this action research, women started to not have to wait for their husbands to come home and catch fish for them. They stopped having to wait for permission to catch fish. Women were able to catch fish more regularly and catch more fish. They also started to have more decision-making power, which became very important because that meant they were able to control what happened to these fish. And in this case, they were able to make sure that their children, remember these little ones who need this nutrition the most, they were able to make sure they got this. And these are just these wonderful little fish. No bones, don't worry. Okay, they have bones. They have tiny, tiny, soft bones. You can make them into delicious fish cakes and chutneys, and they pack such a punch in terms of nutrition. So they're giving these kids a defense against these nutrition-related diseases. And this is coming about through shifts in gender equality. Very interesting. If we shift and turn that same question over to poverty, what do we see? In the world today, we know poverty remains a critical issue. It's getting better, but there's still about 1 in 10 people who suffer from extreme poverty. At the same time, the issue of gender and gender equality remains a pressing issue. It's been estimated that the time it'll take for us to get to a situation of economic equality between women and men, it's estimated at about 170 years. That is a long time. That's like saying, okay, we'll wait for our children's children. That'll be okay. That's such a long time. But what does that mean in terms of zero sum? If we approach it that way, then it suggests we have to choose between poverty reduction and solving the gender equality issues. The good news is there's all sorts of research now that says don't choose. Groups like the World Bank and the IMF have looked at it and said that increasing equality is leading to stronger economies from national to global levels. This is also something I've seen in countries like Egypt, where, for example, women fish retailers, where they get very poor prices for what they're trying to sell because of gender-related issues like harassment in the marketplace. When those issues are reduced, they're able to get better prices, and it translates right over into poverty reduction. Very interesting. What this also has going for it, this synergy between equity and equality, is that there are other potential spin-off effects. And there's a story from Nepal that helps show those. My connection to this story started when I started working on community forests at a time when the government of Nepal had handed over the right to protect and manage the forest to communities. And for all the world, it looked like a zero-sum game. The forests were being protected, they were winning, but the people who depended on them most, women and the poor in particular, who needed firewood to cook, who needed to collect firewood to sell, for example, when they had no other options, they were largely being excluded. Even if we looked just at the people, it looked like a zero-sum game, win-lose, because the more powerful people in the community, the wealthier men from the higher status groups, they were maintaining, they were consolidating that position of power by being part of the committees, getting the benefits, whatever came out of the committees. Those marginalized folks, they were not getting those benefits. That access issue was a big part of that lose for them, what we just talked about. But there was another part as well. One woman said, I have to collect wood, but now if I try to participate or I try to go into the forest, people call me a forest destroyer. They chase me from meetings. And she described it in terms of feeling such shame. Now what we did in that situation, some terrific researchers there got together and we started working through this action research process, looking at, okay, can these communities, would it be of interest to them and use to them if they took a very collaborative approach to this management process, focusing on equity? And so we worked with them and developed participatory monitoring and visioning and learning by doing it, and it was a really exciting few years. And what we saw change was very revealing, because first decision-making changed. Women and the poor started getting on committees, and they started being able to voice their interests and their concerns. Sometimes they argued, but more often than not, the arguments got solved because the whole system was changing towards a more equitable, inclusive system. At the same time, because who made decisions was shifting, what we saw was that the plans and actions started to change. For example, where collecting firewood had been banned, now there was a big protected area, but also kind of a flexible use area for the families that really had no other options. At the same time, the forest groups started to develop other options like raising small livestock to sale, so people did have alternatives. They even started giving subsidies to poor families, for example, free timber, certain portions, so that people could reinforce their houses so they wouldn't be blown down by storms, and they didn't have to go and steal from the forest to get the wood to do that. And what this led to over a few years were shifts that really spoke to this question of zero-sum, because what we saw was the forest was still winning. It was still very well protected. In fact, more people got more excited about being part of protecting it. There were more volunteers patrolling for free to keep outsiders from stealing from the forest. There were more people getting involved in more activities like replanting bare slopes so that the soil wouldn't run away, so there'd be no mudslides, which would also help protect the watershed. More people got involved. The committee had more success doing what it was trying to do. But on the other side, the income of the poor and women in particular started to grow. And the employment through the forest groups and the small loans through the forest groups. And what surprised us was that it wasn't growing because there was just a redistribution. Their share was growing also because the whole pie was growing. Everybody in the community started to see those same benefits of income, of loans, of employment. So there was this momentum through equity and equality. We saw the community getting stronger and poverty reducing. At the very end, when we talked to people about so what's your big takeaway from this? Win or lose? What do you think? And we weren't surprised when women and the poor spoke of how much it was a win for them. We were really interested to hear the folks that looked like they were winning at the outset. And we thought, oh, well, maybe they'll feel like they've lost power. And what they described was that in fact for them it was a win, not only because the pie was bigger and the forest was protected, but also because they now felt that they were part of a community that had so much less conflict. They were part of a community that was proud of what it was accomplishing, and that group said that before they had authority, but now they had respect. And that meant quite a big deal to them. So not so much zero-sum on that front either. But what if we turn to that second question? The question that gentleman asked about, but what about the men? If there's all this equality, what will happen? And the outcomes that we've already seen, they clearly speak to that in the sense that, well, food security and poverty reduction and even protecting forests and communities that are strong, those are benefits for women and men, aren't they? But we can answer that question in another way as well, getting perspectives from men themselves, men who have made transitions from less equal and equitable relationships and situations to much more so. I can share some examples from Zambia, for example, where we do some work with small-scale fishing communities. And something to know about Zambia is that in that context, there are expectations about how men should be, how they should behave. Norms existing in every single country. In this case, in that particular context, there's an expectation that men, they should be the strong decision maker of the household. They should be independent in the sense that if they earn an income, that's for them and they can spend it on what they want. There's a strong expectation that they should not be the caregivers of their children. That's women's work. So when we asked men about what did they think of having made a transition through various processes and over various lengths of time for various reasons, they came up with some really insightful answers, and across the board they talked about the reasons why it was good for them, and one even talked about why he would continue to do it in the face of other men pushing him to backslide. And one reason I wanted to share was one of the men related to that norm about caregiving, and he said, having shifted, I can now see myself as a man who is able to be close to my children, and that for him is a win. There was another gentleman who took a highly pragmatic approach to it. It was about shifts in decision making, and I'll read it directly because I don't want to lose his lovely words here. It's highly pragmatic, going from a high pressure decision making role to one that's shared decision making. He saw as very good because he said, if men always think they are the leaders of the home, they will stress themselves and die early. A third gentleman, a fellow by the name of Justin, he really spoke about a combination of things, and part of it was that shift in decision making. And that was very important to him because he saw that he and his wife had been operating very much separately, and now with the shift he saw them as a team. He talked about their mutual respect, and he talked about harmony in the house, and that was good for them and all their children. And more than that, he saw it having benefits in terms of where they were headed, and that he felt they were headed out of poverty. And he said things like, we're on the way because we're working together, we're going to be able to replace our thatched roof with a real iron roof that will protect us well. And for him, he described, if we can keep going in this equitable way, in this way of cooperation, he said, and we don't backslide, we will move to a higher level. So in this long journey from the woodshed through a couple of decades of research in development, I've had a chance to reflect on zero-sumness over time, and there was a thought that I wanted to share. The thought is that it seems to me that whether we are working in development or volunteering in development, or whether we are trying to bring around the future that we want through who we are and what we do in our families, who we are and what we do in our schools, in our communities, it seems to me that it is very much worth it to surface and to question the assumptions that are all around us, and that the assumptions that guide what we do and how we approach these big challenges. When we apply that thought to zero-sumness, and we think about equity and equality and getting to that future, all the signals are there that it's time to move beyond thinking in terms of zero-sum. Doing so, moving beyond zero-sum, will give us an opportunity. And that opportunity is about having a future creation process that is not about one group, any group, men, women, any group, needing to lose so that another group can win. It's an opportunity to make getting to the future we want about a process in which we are seeking out and we are choosing pathways and possibilities in which we can all win together. Thank you.